In the last episode, we bought and tore down this cheap Craigslist 454. Unfortunately, once it was apart, we ran into a few not so surprising surprises. The most concerning of those, by far, was the condition of the cylinder walls. None of the cylinders were spotless, and a few of them had some fairly significant buildup. The concern at this point is whether or not this block is still worth using for our purposes. Even before cleaning it up any farther, I'm pretty confident that a machine shop could kill this rust problem with an overbore. But, and I'm sure this is disappointing to some of you, but that's not the kind of build we're doing here. Very similar to the last big engine rebuild project on this channel, we're doing this low buck. We've got a few more tools and tricks up our sleeve than last time, but for the most part, this is still going to be a budget build. And something there simply isn't room for in that budget is a machine shop. So, to keep this whole thing DIY, and also as a bit of an experiment to see exactly how much we can get away with, we're going to attempt to hone this engine block out ourselves. I'm trying not to make too many references to our previous videos, but I think I have to mention that last time we honed engine cylinders. The small block Chevy 350 in our S10 Blazer project blew a head gasket, and I decided to do a full rebuild on it. Even with that head gasket problem, the engine had been running just fine, but there was some pitting in one of the cylinders. We used a power drill and a ball hone to clean that up, and we were able to achieve this final result. You could feel the pitting in the cylinder before, but after honing it sure felt smooth and seemed to just be more of a stain. This mark was also halfway down the cylinder and likely would have mattered less than one towards the top. After honing all the cylinders, we threw that engine back together and it's already done 10,000 miles. So it seems like it worked out the last time we did this, but this 454 block is a whole different story. Most people online would probably tell you that this block wasn't worth the effort, and at the very least it would have to be overbored to clear up the cylinders. But for better or worse, I like to try things for myself, and I'm really curious what results we can get. Similar to the last engine rebuild, and a lot of the things we do on this channel, this is a bit of an experiment to see exactly what we can get away with. Something different from last time is that instead of using a ball type flex hone, we'll be using a spring-loaded stone type of hone. This tool does its thing with 3 flat abrasive stones. Just like a ball hone, this tightens down into the chuck of a power drill and has 3 spring-loaded arms that the stones pivot on the ends of. A rigid hone would be a much better choice than a flexible one like this, but one of those would run more like $150 versus this one, which only cost me $15. One benefit to this type of hone is that it can fit a wide variety of cylinder diameters. They can also have different coarseness of stones installed, though I ended up just using the ones that came on the tool for this engine. There is also an adjustment at the center of the tool for the amount of spring tension on the arms. Before actually using the hone, we want the cylinder walls to be as clean as possible so that we're not depositing hard materials into the stones that might scratch up our bores. We'll spray down each of the cylinders with brake clean and give them a light scrub with a red Scotch-Brite pad to give them an approximation of smoothness. This should knock off the loose rust and make sure there's nothing else in the bores. Then we'll spray down the cylinders with some WD-40. You can get honing specific fluid or even use something like ATF, but I think this will do the job just fine. To get an idea of how well this is going to work, we'll start with one of the rustier cylinders, number 4. Once the hone is in the cylinder, general practice is not to let it stop spinning. This will help keep the cross-hatching clean and continuous. What you definitely don't want to do is stop the hone at the bottom of the cylinder and drag it back out. That can create perpendicular scoring, which is very bad and can let gas and oil past your piston rings. To get things started, we're spinning the drill quickly and moving it slowly. And we'll stop now and then to wipe down and re-oil the cylinder we're working on. This is the cylinder after about 30 seconds of honing. Clearly, it's going to need a fair bit more, but the results are so far looking promising. We're getting down to bare metal in a lot of the rusty areas. You can also see the wear line at the highest point that the piston ring reaches. In this case, that ridge is very minor, but we'll still try to minimize it with the hone. If you were just glaze breaking, you would want a much faster plunge speed and a lower drill RPM. But we need a whole lot of cleaning action here, and we'll worry about the crosshatch angle later. Another thing you definitely don't want to do is drive the hone too far into the cylinder and hit the webbing for the crank main bearings. If you hit those, there's a very good chance you'll end up breaking a stone. We'll keep on honing, and after about another 60 seconds, here's what the cylinder is looking like. It's not exactly shiny, but it's looking far, far better. There is some pitting from the rust, although the WD-40 spray is making it look much worse than it is. What's left at this point can be felt as a slightly rough surface, but there aren't any big bumps or gouges. We'll keep on going and do several more cycles of honing, cleaning, honing, cleaning, honing, cleaning, honing, cleaning, honing, cleaning, and then we'll take another look. We finally have the cylinder in a condition that is approaching acceptable. There is still some staining from the rust, but it feels totally smooth. Grinding away at the cylinder with the hone is actually enlarging the bore. Granted, it's a pretty small amount, but if we keep going, it could cause problems. Mainly, if the piston fits too loose, it could rock back and forth during operation. Also, this type of hone won't be able to take any taper out of the cylinders, and continued use could likely make that worse. By making sure that we spend a lot of time cutting away at the bottoms of the cylinders, we can help to mitigate that. Still, we have to find a point where the cylinders are good enough and stop before we cause more problems. Of course, everyone's going to have their own opinion and definition of acceptable, and for this project, my standards are seeming pretty low. But we'll work with what we have and try to clean up the rest of the cylinders. Once the 4 on the passenger side are looking good, we'll move on over to the driver's side. This is cylinder number 7, the one that I decided was at least tied with 3rd for the worst in the block. This one is going to need a lot of attention. It got the same treatment as all of the others, except I spent a full 20 minutes honing and cleaning and honing this cylinder. Officially, this tool is only really meant to be a glaze-breaking hone, one that would be used to rough up the cylinder walls and create a cross-hatching pattern that should help piston rings break in. But we're going way beyond that use of the tool, so who knows what this is actually going to do for us. All I can say is that the cylinder sure looks and feels a hell of a lot better than it did when we started. It's definitely not ideal, and the dimensions of the cylinder walls are a little bit of a liability at this point, but any day of the week I would rather have piston rings riding on this surface than the one we started with. Hopefully, in operation, any little pits that are left will fill up with carbon and the piston rings will break in normally. But the only way to find out is to try, so we better get to work honing the rest of the cylinders. Hopefully, the engine building crimes that I'm committing here will lead to some answers as to what exactly can be accomplished with a handheld hone. Though it should go without saying that, again, none of this is ideal, but the real world rarely is. Posters with photos of cylinder walls just like these are on the wall of a trade school somewhere, and the title is probably something along the lines of "Signs that cylinders need to be bored." But I don't need some stuck-up paper on a wall telling me what to do. We'll do a bit more work on these cylinders to clean up the marks a bit farther. We also still have to come back and put some 45-degree cross-hatching in there. And even farther down the line, once the engine block has been cleaned up, we'll even measure the cylinders to see exactly how bad they are. But here in the present of this story, we have our block torn down almost all the way, and we've done the preliminary sort of honing on the cylinders. We weren't worrying about cross-hatching or anything like that. We were just trying to remove all the worrying rust in the cylinders. And while the rust itself is gone, near as I can tell, there are still some stains from it. It doesn't feel like anything. I can't feel any of this. I can feel the ridge right there a tiny bit. I can't feel any of the rest of it with a finger or fingernail or anything, even when the cylinder is totally clean, which it isn't at the moment. But I can't feel any of that. I don't think it's going to be a problem. It's just kind of a stain. I think we're gonna be okay here. Even, without the gloves, none of this is anything I can feel. The cylinders on the driver's side are definitely the worst, but again, it feels totally smooth to the touch. Well, except for the grit that's still in there. So I think we're done trying to clean these up, but we will come back and give it a better crosshatch pattern. Right now, it's going to vary a little cylinder to cylinder since I wasn't really worrying about that too much. And this one actually has some scrapies, probably from pulling the hone out too fast. But in a cleaner cylinder here, you can see how shallow these markings are. I was really just trying to clean up the cylinder walls, not worrying too much about the crosshatch just yet, so we will do a little bit more. This kind of pattern can theoretically be less conducive to ring seating than a 45 or 60 degree crosshatch pattern. That's what we're going to be shooting for. For now, I feel like the proof of concept has been, well, proved. The cylinder's cleaned up enough that we're going to try to use this engine block. The road ahead of us might be just as bumpy as the cylinder walls, but if we don't keep pressing onward, we'll never find out.